So I'm just going to pitch it out there, and Glenn, this is for you first. What did you think of the last legislature's budget, and what, if anything, would you have done different?
Well, fortunately, in the state of Texas, by our Constitution, we are required to have a balanced budget. And just like our family lives within its means, our state is required to do that as well. We're also fortunate that we have a pretty dynamic and expanding economy that has allowed us, and smartly so, to put away funds in a rainy day fund to use for unexpected expenses, and that's kind of what our family does too. So I was glad to see that the legislature was able to come together, was able to address some priority issues in the budget, was able to restore some of the funding that had been cut out of public education, which was needed to make sure that we're maintaining the quality of education. I agree that money is not always the answer. I think our school districts have to also adopt those types of best practices that businesses adopt to make sure that they're all operating as efficiently, not only in our region, but across our state. So I was glad for those things. I was very pleased to see the legislature move to put Proposition 6 on the ballot, and the voters overwhelmingly passed the Proposition 6, which was the water funding, the $2 billion funding that I mentioned earlier, because that is such a critical need. Otherwise, as it relates to budgeting going forward, what I mentioned earlier, I think, is still very much the case. We need to look at all areas of our government and how it's operated to make sure it's operating efficiently, and make sure that technology is being used to get the most results with the least amount of money. I noticed just recently when we're filing our campaign finance reports, we have a technology system that allows them to do this electronically, but it's using technology that was probably written at least 20 years ago. To say that it's not user-friendly is a huge understatement. If I see that as it relates to candidates running for office, I can only imagine how many other individuals, taxpayers, and businesses are faced with the same type of frustration when they're trying to interact with our government, and trying to eliminate that kind of waste and inefficiency is very important.
So I understand the state legislature has a very difficult job in figuring out where all the funding goes. What I was not a fan of was the increase in the budget. I think that there's, a lot of issues need to be funded, and a lot of areas need to be funded. But what we need to focus on, instead of increasing the budget for all of these areas, is to cut the budget in areas that it's not necessary. So we have a lot of state-run departments and agencies that are outdated and probably need to be addressed. And if it's not necessary, we should take a look at that. And if they're not necessary, we can actually get rid of that and save that money from that specific agency or administration and spend it elsewhere where we feel that it needs to be spent. In regards to tapping into the rainy day fund for water, I believe that we do have enough funding within our budget to pay for water, and I don't feel that we actually needed to tap into the rainy day fund for it. I think that really needs to be saved for specific statewide emergencies, and we are slowly going in that direction, but we haven't gotten to that point yet, is what I believe. So really it is a difficult job. It is important to keep a balanced budget. All of us individually are able, hopefully, to do that at in our individual lives, but that's pretty much how I thought about the state. Thank you.
Mr. Shaheen?
I was disappointed in the budget process. What was set out by the Speaker of the House was water, transportation, and education were the priorities of the legislative session, and only one of those got funded during the regular session. So it's either a priority or it's not a priority. Texas gets X amount of dollars. We have $200 billion biennial that we receive. Half of that, by the way, is from the federal government, which is pretty concerning. And nevertheless, that's the dollars that we have to work with. And what we ended up doing is having to go into special session after special session to get these items funded. And that's not the way it should work. What we need to do is, what are our priorities? You fund those first. I would add criminal justice to the three that I already mentioned. And then the dollars that are left over are what are allocated. I mean, how we funded $24 million for Hollywood to make movies in the state of Texas before we funded education is beyond me. So I guess I have a little bit more to learn on how the legislative session works. But what we need to do is find out what our priorities are, fund those, and then what the dollars are that are left over, we make those decisions, and that's the approach.